Billionaire father watches waitress feed his twin daughters and changes his life. On an afternoon when the sky seemed to fall on the city, the rain poured down the windows as if the world outside was crying in silence. Inside the small restaurant, on the corner, the sound of drops hitting the glass competed with the muffled sizzle of the griddle, heating up forgotten hamburgers. It was one of those dead hours, empty tables, damp napkins, the clock slowly marking the day's survival. And there was Melissa, the waitress with a tired smile and persistent soul, cleaning the counter with the same cloth she had worn since early. She had no plans for later, only overdue bills, a rent gathering dust in sealed envelopes, and a heart full of questions they no longer knew who to ask for an answer to. But then, something caught his attention. At the corner table near the fogged window, two small black girls with attentive eyes tried not to be noticed. They must be about 7, 8 years old, Melissa thought. And what were they doing there, alone, huddled together as someone carrying the world on their shoulders? One of them tugged at the zipper of her colorful backpack. The other watched the room with the eyes of someone who has learned to hide in public. When Melissa looked better, she realized they were trying to share in secret a package of broken cookies. Have you ever seen a child share hunger? Have you ever witnessed that kind of silent care, where love is bigger than an empty stomach? Melissa felt her body freeze for a moment. And there, between a poorly cleaned table and the solitude of the walls, something inside her woke up. She went to the kitchen without saying anything. He picked up 2 plates, simple rice, grilled chicken, some beans, and hot vegetables. He put everything with the same care he would serve the owner of the restaurant, if he still stopped by. Then he went to the table, bent down slowly, smiled as if he understood without asking, and placed the plates before them. No charge, without demanding anything, without explaining. But what Melissa didn't know, it's just that she wasn't alone. In that choice, as she stood up adjusting her already faded apron, something else was happening on the other side of the street. Behind the tinted windows of a parked car, someone watched it all. Not just any customer, not an ordinary curious, but someone who could change the course of her life with a single decision. Who was he? Why was he there, silently, watching, and more? Importantly, what was this gesture, so small, so invisible to the world, about to unleash? The answer would come soon, but not in the way Melissa imagined, and much less the way the world usually tells stories. Across the street, as the rain poured down the windshield in crooked lines, Samuel Bailey stood motionless in a black armored car parked under the shadows of an awning. The engine was off, the environment stuffy, but he didn't seem to notice. His gaze was fixed on that corner table, not on the children, but on the woman who, with a simple gesture, had done what many with millions in their pockets would not do with a penny of conscience. At that time, the world stopped for him. Samuel was a name that circulated among the greats. A billionaire in the technology sector, widowed for 4 years, reclusive since the death of his wife. A woman who, according to them, was his opposite. Warm, present, passionate about social causes. Ever since he lost it, Samuel had locked himself behind ciphers, contracts, and invisible walls that kept the world away. He delegated everything: the projects, the education of his twin daughters, the dinners, even the silence. Everything. Except for that moment. But why was he there on that day, at that time, exactly in that place? The answer was simple and unexpected. He was following from afar. The daughters had escaped the nanny's attention for a minute, and as a precaution, a security guard tracked them down by the location of the smartwatch. Samuel, his heart still wounded by the absence of their mother, went out alone to see them up close, something he didn't do often. It was the discreet way he had found to feel like a father even if he was far away, and then he saw it. He saw what perhaps not even the security cameras had captured accurately. Not the dish served, but Melissa's expression. A real smile without obligation. A gesture from someone who clearly had no idea who those children were. That he didn't expect anything in return. that she didn't know she was being watched. When was the last time Samuel witnessed such an act? A gesture that did not cost millions but was worth more than any social project sponsored with a logo and spotlights. He didn't know. He just felt it. He felt something break inside him, or maybe start over. He picked up his phone, typed a short message to his personal assistant, and said in a low voice, "Find out who she is." And there, with his hands on the steering wheel and his gaze still locked on that corner table, Samuel Bailey made a decision that would change not only Melissa's life, but his as well. But no one, not even him, was prepared for what would come. It's because goodness, when planted in unexpected soil, doesn't just flourish. It transforms entire landscapes. The following Thursday, the restaurant was busier than usual. It was payday, and Melissa, as always, divided her attention between writing down orders and doing mental math to decide what she would be able to pay first that month, the electricity bill or the card installment. That's when a man in a dark suit walked in holding a leather briefcase. He didn't ask for anything. He just asked, "Melissa Brandt?" She froze inside. The name said with such formality, coming from a stranger with the look of a lawyer, seemed like the beginning of some problem. Perhaps an old debt, a court summons, or perhaps a mistake he didn't even know he had made. But the man only smiled lightly and handed him an envelope. Inside there were two things: an elegant card with the name Samuel Bailey printed in gold relief, and an invitation to a personal meeting in a reserved place. Would you accept such an invitation? From a powerful stranger who knows your name, your address, and apparently everything about you? Melissa hesitated, but something about her, an old stubborn instinct, said, "Go." 2 days later, she arrived at the indicated location, an old library, inside a mansion that looked more like a museum. When Samuel entered the room, there were no cameras. There were no visible security guards. Only him in simple clothes with the posture of someone who carried many winters inside his chest. He went straight to the point. He did not mention money. He did not speak of charity. He spoke of human need. She said that her daughters, since their mother's death, had grown up surrounded by protocols, professionals, security guards, and trained nannies. But that something was missing. What was missing was the gaze that sees beyond function, the touch that is not taught in manuals, the presence that is born of real life. And then came the proposal. Samuel wanted Melissa to spend part of her days with the girls as a kind of bridge. Someone who could give them emotional reference outside the golden walls where they lived. No classes, no medical care or protocols, just presence, affection, simplicity. He needed someone who didn't belong to that world. Just for that. Melissa didn't know what to say. It was all strange, improbable, almost absurd. But as she thought, she remembered the twins' eyes that day and felt his heart sway. Because sometimes life turns a corner where you never thought you'd pass. And there, you find something you never knew you were looking for, and she still didn't know. But that one would change everything, including what she thought about herself. The first time Melissa climbed the steps of the mansion, Bailey as an official employee, or at least as someone authorized to be there, she realized that the cold wasn't just coming from the marble on the floor. The air was too clean, the curtains were too perfect, and the smiles, they seemed calculated, almost trained. She was greeted by an impeccable housekeeper who handed her a badge, as if it made her a real part of the system. But the woman's eyes said otherwise. Melissa didn't belong on that upstairs. Each aisle was a silent parade of luxury, and her every step echoed as if it were a mistake. Some employees did not even greet her. Others exchanged glances with each other as she passed. And there were even those who did not hide their disdain. Is that the one? The waitress? How long will this last, huh? Melissa pretended she didn't hear, but he heard everything. Those words weighed more than trays, and yet it went up. Because in the room decorated with stuffed animals and books in 3 languages, 2 little souls were waiting for her with a twinkle in their eyes that no one inside had. The twins ran to her as if they had known her for years. And maybe they did, somehow. Not for the biography, but for the energy. By the way, Melissa sat on the floor with them, drew without haste, listened without correcting. She didn't demand it, she just was. Before long, one of the girls began calling her Aunt Mel. The other, more reserved, just leaned her head on his shoulder without saying anything. But there, in that silence, there was a whole world of acceptance. And it was in this small universe, between dolls and whispered confidences, that Melissa realized it didn't need to be accepted by those above, when she was loved by those who were still growing. But what she didn't know yet was that this genuine, simple, real connection would begin to threaten everything that upstairs so jealously protected, and that, for many there, this was too dangerous. It was a quiet afternoon, one of those in which the sun escapes through the windows and childish laughter fills the house with life. Melissa played with the girls in the master bedroom, among scattered cushions and colored pencils rolling on the floor. They were drawing invisible people, as they called them, characters that existed only in the imagination. And while one drew a princess in an apron, the other rummaged through an old box of memories that belonged to her mother. No one noticed when a yellowed envelope, already worn out by time, fell on the carpet. It was Melissa who saw it first. Not knowing what it was, he picked up the paper carefully and looked at the soft, rounded handwriting, written in blue pen. At the top of the sheet, only one name: to Samuel. Melissa's heart wavered. She was not the type to invade privacy, but something in that role seemed to ask to be read. And then she read it. The letter written by the twins' mother shortly before she died was a mixture of farewell, hope, and guidance. In the midst of the soft and courageous words, one sentence stood out as if it had been written in bold. Promise me that our daughters will really know the world, who will live with ordinary people, that they will feel empathy, not just security. Melissa stopped. The weight of those words fell on her like a silent wave, and suddenly it all made sense. Samuel was not cold. He was paralyzed. Paralyzed by a promise he never knew how to keep. The absence of his mother had left more than nostalgia. He had left an unfulfilled order, an emotional testament. Melissa put the letter back gently, saying nothing. But inside her, something changed. She was not there by chance, and perhaps she was the only one capable of fulfilling the last wish of a woman he had never met, but whom he already admired. Later, when she went upstairs and saw Samuel with his back turned, looking at the garden through the window, Melissa said, nothing. But he knew. He also carried the weight of this letter, even without having read it aloud to anyone. And for the first time since the beginning, she realized that she was not just a link between worlds. She was the answer that time had hidden, and that now revealed itself at the right moment. The Bailey Foundation Hall was spotless that night. Huge chandeliers reflected in crystal glasses, guests whispered powerful names between sips of champagne, and everything, absolutely everything, smelled of control. It was the great annual fundraising event for social projects, but among so many rehearsed speeches and stretched smiles, what was least there was sincerity. Melissa was invited to accompany the twins. She arrived with a simple dress and an improvised badge, still uncomfortable in that environment where appearance always screamed louder than essence. The girls seemed proud to have her there. They took care of her as if they were keeping a valuable secret that no one else understands. But not everyone shared the same look. At one point, while Melissa was talking to a volunteer about a new literacy project in peripheral neighborhoods, a coordinator of the foundation, elegant, with high heels and an even higher ego, approached. And in a cold, harsh, calculated tone, he said aloud, "Is that the girl in the cafeteria? I didn't know that. Now Charity also comes with a companion." The hall froze for seconds, and before anyone could react, one of the twins, silent but attentive, already had her cell phone in her hand. He recorded everything. The way the woman turned her back to Melissa's wounded look, trying to disguise her embarrassment in front of the guests. The video hit the networks hours later, and what was supposed to be just another charity event made headlines. The arrogance of the elite against whom in fact made the difference. The waitress despised, the public servant humiliated in front of children. The internet did not forgive. The world saw it, and he did. Samuel saw it too. He saw how his daughters reacted. He saw how Melissa remained dignified, even wounded. He saw how the newspapers tried to stifle, how the directors tried to justify. But above all, he saw how the foundation that bore his wife's name had become a stage for vanities and privileges. Next morning, he convened the council and did what no one expected. He fired the entire executive board. He canceled the contracts. It changed the mission of the foundation. And in front of the press, he announced that Melissa would take on a new position, social impact advisor, with autonomy to create and lead real projects, connecting people with people, and not figures with speeches. Many doubted. Some scoffed, but the twins applauded. And in that gesture, Samuel realized he was not just rebuilding an institution. He was reconstructing the memory of the woman who had taught him to see the world with more human eyes. And Melissa? She just took a deep breath. And he decided it was time to occupy the space that life finally offered him. The elegant salons that had once revered Samuel Bailey were now beginning to whisper. Over low-key dinners, thinly veiled meetings, and coded messages, influential businessmen, longtime allies, silent beneficiaries of the decisions of the foundation's former board, gathered to discuss a new subject: Melissa Brandt, a waitress in the center of the table. A stranger in the heart of the empire. They didn't like that. They said she was too emotional, inexperienced, a reputational risk. But what really bothered them was something else. She didn't owe anyone anything. He did not bow. Don't smile. Out of obligation. And above all, he didn't play the mask game. Soon came the first attempts at sabotage. Internal reports began to appear with grotesque errors, as if attributing to Melissa decisions she never made. Rumors were leaked to the press suggesting favoritism to family members, and she didn't even have family nearby. And in a last move, they tried to plant a scandal. They alleged that she was embezzling funds from a new project in partnership with public schools. It was an orchestrated, subtle, but cruel lie. And for a few days, the doubt hovered. Samuel was between silence and fury. Part of the board was still pressuring him to remove her until everything was clarified. The media wanted blood, and Melissa. He was silent, not out of fear, but because I had learned that sometimes the answer comes from where no one expects. That was when, in the midst of the chaos, a press conference already scheduled for another announcement took a new turn. The cameras on, the journalists prepared. But it wasn't Samuel who took the stage, it was the twins. Small but firm, holding a handwritten sheet of paper, in the crooked and honest handwriting of children who had learned what gratitude was. One of them held the microphone with both hands, and he read, in a clear voice, "Melissa saw us when no one else did. When we were hungry, when we were sad, when we were lonely. She never asked us who we were, she just loved us. And today we just want to ask, who are you? If you don't know how to recognize those who take care of others with truth." The room fell silent. No questions, no retort, no doubt. The video of that letter read live went viral in minutes, not as a scandal, but as a manifesto. Thousands of people began to defend Melissa. They denounced the persecution, and they demanded respect. Society understood it was no longer a foundation. It was about which world we want to build, and for whom. And at that moment, the same ones who tried to silence understood that they had made an irreversible mistake. They messed with those who have truth in the eyes of two children. Time passed, and with it, the wounds healed, not by forgetfulness, but by transformation. Months after the turmoil, scandal, letters and difficult decisions, the city witnessed something new emerge. In the same building where only the Bailey Foundation had once been, there were now colorful signs, real smiles, and a simple but powerful sign: Project Bridge. a social program that united two worlds that rarely touched. At the center of the idea was her, Melissa Brandt. The former waitress was now a mentor and emotional director of a project that made the impossible seem natural, putting elite children to live with humble realities in workshops, visits, conversation circles, sincere sharing, not as charity, but as an exchange of life. A bridge, as Samuel had dreamed, but that only became real because of her. On the day of the official launch, journalists, educators, artists, politicians, and even former critics were present. But it was not the grandeur of the event that drew attention. It was the climate, the feeling that something genuine was starting there. Samuel, discreet as always, took the stage. He was lighter, more human. He took the microphone and, before any master of ceremonies introduced him, said, "First of all, I need to introduce the woman who saved my family, before I even knew who we were." The audience turned around. The cameras searched. Melissa, sitting in the back rows in a simple dress and teary eyes, hesitated. But then he heard two small voices shouting softly at the back of the stage, "Come, Aunt Mel." The twins entered hand in hand, smiling like the first day she served them a hot plate. They took the microphone together, and with the same firmness of those who are not afraid to tell the truth, they added, "She saw us before everyone else." The silence in the room was total, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was sacred. A silence that recognized greatness where before it only saw service, that celebrated a woman who didn't need power to transform, who reminded everyone that silent love is the only one capable of creating lasting revolutions. On that day, not only a new project was born, a new story was born, with a new home, a new name, and a bridge. One that will continue to unite hearts long after all the headlines are gone. Sometimes the most powerful stories don't start with applause, but with a silent gesture made by someone no one was looking at. Melissa didn't save the whole world, but she did save the world of two children. And that was enough to start a transformation that neither money, nor titles, nor the stages would be able to generate. Because there are things that only the heart sees, and when a simple soul dares to act with truth, the whole universe bows in recognition. Perhaps what is missing in the world today is no longer leaders, but more bridges. And the question that remains is, who are you seeing that no one else sees? Perhaps this is where your own revolution begins. If this story touched you, then stop it all now. Leave a comment saying, "I saw it before everyone else," and prove that you are part of this generation that believes in the power of empathy. Like, share, and send this video to someone who has already done something for you, without knowing the size of the impact. And if you want to know another story where a silent decision changes an entire destiny, click right now on the video that is here on the side. Because there, a school janitor discovers a secret inside, a backpack, and what he does next makes news all over the world.